glad to have all of you in class. It's good to see you. Good to be here in Denver again. See some of you in class that were in the class last year. Let me call the roll, and when I call your name, some of you may not be acquainted with each other, so tell where you're from and maybe a little bit about your connection here at Bear Valley if you're just starting or you've already graduated from here, or so we'll know just a little bit about you. Garrett Hookout. Okay.
I graduated from Bear Valley in February, and I'm now working with the Bear Valley congregation as their.
Oh, you are? Okay, so you work here at the Bear Valley Church. All right, very good. John Gaines.
I am from Burlington, Washington, Northwest Washington. This is my first day ever on campus here.
Okay, very good. You said you graduated from Freed Hardeman.
Yes, sir.
A few years ago.
1976, so that was a few years ago, yes, sir.
To me, that seems like not long ago. For some of you, that would seem a long time ago, I guess. Mike Green.
Mike Green, worked with the church in Tacoma, Washington, and I graduated with Garrett in February of this year.
Okay. Tony Lee.
From Wuhan, China.
Okay, great. And how long have you been here?
I've been here in Denver for the 6 months.
6 months,
Yeah.
okay. Very good, very good. Manny? Okay.
I'm from India. I'm actually taking the undergraduate classes here.
Uh-huh. Where in India are you from?
From Andhra Pradesh.
Okay, okay. I've been to India once. So there about 2 weeks. I held sessions for preachers 4 days in one place, and then I go to another place 4 days, another place 4 days.
Which part of India?
I went to Bombay,
Okay.
Mumbai, and was there 4 days, and then went from there to Hyderabad, and then up to Delhi and around in that area. And
So you worked with Mr. Craig Phillips in Bombay?
yes, there's another fellow that I went with over there. I can't recall his name right now, but we enjoyed it. Wonderful people there. So that's good. Well, we're glad to have you here. Bob Turner, not here. Chad Wagner, not here. Jason Zeiger.
Yes, sir. I graduated from Bear Valley in 2000, and I'm working with the church in Atlantic, Iowa.
Close to the floods?
Thankfully, no. We are in southwest Iowa, and Cedar Rapids would be northeast, and Des Moines in the middle.
They've really had bad stuff up there.
Yeah, they have.
Terrible. Okay, and Jeremy Sprouse.
From Muskogee, Oklahoma.
Right.
Graduated from Bear Valley in 2000.
Okay, very good. Well, we're glad to have all of you in the class, and hope that we'll have some good discussions and good insights into the Book of Revelation study for this week. Our plan basically will be to have about an hour and a half sessions, then we'll take a 15-minute break, and then another hour and a half, and 15-minute break, and then another hour and a half. So we'll go through till about 7 o'clock is the scheduled time, and we'll probably hit those marks pretty well. Book of Revelation, of course, is a book that is really a book that a lot of people find threatening, fearful, and I don't really think it was intended for that. If you look at the first chapter and verse 3, it says, "Blessed is the one who reads, and the one who hears, and the one who does what's in this book." Now, by blessed is the one who reads probably means the one who reads it out loud to people. You know, in those days you wouldn't have had a copy to take home and read in front of your fireplace. So blessed is the one who reads aloud, and then the one who listens to the one reading, and then does what's in the book. Now, why would Christ promise a blessing to those who read aloud and listen and obey if such wasn't possible, if the meaning was so hidden and so obscure that nobody knew what it was about? So, I believe it's a book we can understand, a book that for which there was a good and clear message to early Christians, something that would have had meaning and a strong encouragement to them and the circumstances in which they found themselves. And so we're looking for that blessing this week, the blessing that comes from reading and hearing and obeying what's in the book. You know, it's a little, this is a little bit of imagination, okay? But the picture I get, the thing that the way I think it worked was, John is on the island of Patmos, and he sees the Lord who tells him to write it down, and he writes it down, and then it's going to be sent to these 7 churches. He tells him to do that. And so just imagine you're in church in Ephesus on Sunday morning, and the pastor gets up, and we're talking about 90 AD or whatever, and an elder gets up and says, "We've just received a letter from Jesus." How long has Jesus been dead? 60 years. We just received a letter from Jesus? Yeah, we just received a letter from Jesus. And I'm going to read to you what the letter from Jesus says. I'm going to read that letter to you. Well, I expect a hush would come over the crowd, don't you? And here he's going to stand up and read the book of Revelation to those people. Well, we have no historical evidence that it ever happened exactly like that, but that's sort of the picture that we seem to get, is send the letter to these churches, and whoever reads is blessed, and the one that hears is blessed, and the one who obeys is blessed. So that's kind of what the book we're looking into today. Now, you've done some reading and writing. I'll collect your papers if you have them ready, and we'll get those papers turned in. I'll read these and try to get them back to you tomorrow. And I've asked you to read my book on Unlocking Revelation and one other book that takes a different view. So we have some interchange of ideas here on this. So I'm not here to push one view to the exclusion of others. Obviously, I've got one that I think is right, or I wouldn't hold it. But I think in this class you ought to be acquainted with other views as well, so you can then make your own choice as to what you think is what you believe the book is about. Now, I want to ask you now. I'll tell this when I read the papers, but let me just ask you to tell me what book you read, so I'll kind of have that in my mind. Now, what book did you read?
I read Brother Foy Wallace's commentary on the Book of Revelation.
Foy Wallace's book, all right.
Hendrickson.
Hendrickson, okay.
Walbert.
Walbert, good, all right.
John T. Hines.
Say again.
John T. Hines.
Oh, John T. Hines, okay. Very good, okay. Hendrickson.
Yeah,
Hendrickson.
Lindsay.
Lindsay, all right. Okay. Well, that's a pretty good range of views. And so as we go along, I will ask you, well, somebody tell me what Hendrickson's view was on this, and so we'll kind of have some of these views to look at as we go along. Now, the first thing I'd like to do in our session today is to review 5 views of the book of Revelation. Now, if you take all the people who write about Revelation and all the people who preach about it on television or wherever, and study their views, they tend to collect into about 5 different groups. 5 groups. Not everybody in that group would agree with each other on everything, and there might be some who would fall on the cracks between some of these. I wouldn't say that this would cover everything anybody's ever written, but in terms of fairly well-known, prominent views, there are about 5 that stand out. Hendrickson would have one. John T. Hines would be in another category. Walvoord would be in another. And so we'd have these different views. Foy Wallace would be another. So we've pretty well got these views represented in what you've read. Now here's what I want to do. I want to introduce these views and talk a little bit about each one of them a little bit. And then I want us to go through some things that I call keys that help us have a chance to look at some things, some key things the book of Revelation tells us about itself. We want to get those sort of in our minds as we try to decide something about which of these views might have the most merit. So let's take a look at these views. The first one would be a view that the book of Revelation is mainly about the fall of Rome. Let's explore that one a little bit. That's the one that is in the book that you read that I've written, if you've read that book. So let's talk about that one a little, just a capsule, and then we'll capsule each one of them. So this view says that fundamentally these Christians in the 7 churches of Asia in those areas, the Christians there are about to undergo a terrible persecution. That the book was written, the date of the book would be in the 80s or 90s, early 90s would be the date of the writing, and that it is to deal with an immediate problem they face. That these 7 churches are located in the Roman province of Asia Minor, and so they are under Roman domination, strong Roman influence, and that persecution is about to come upon them from the Roman government. And that this book is written as a promise to them that if they'll be faithful unto death, if they'll be willing to stay true to their faith, even if it means they die, that the Lord will reward them for their faithfulness, and that He will eventually bring down to defeat the empire that's persecuted, the Roman Empire. So that view is one that is says that the book of Revelation deals with a fairly immediate problem that they're facing, and helps them to know how to deal with that issue, and that the message for us today is indirect in the sense that it's written primarily for them and their set of circumstances, but by looking over their shoulders, of course, we learn lots of things too. And isn't that the way most New Testament books are? I mean, the Corinthians, the first they were written to deal with their problems, and we learn by looking over their shoulder at what we can apply to ourselves. So that view would say that that's the central message of the book of Revelation. It's about to those churches dealing with an immediate problem and how God eventually is going to work that out. So that would be possibility number one. Possibility number one, the persecuted Rome is the persecutor of the early church, and God is going to deal with that set of circumstances, and He gives them some insight into His playbook. Okay, number two is that the book of Revelation is about the fall of Jerusalem. Let me go back to view number one. There's several books that fall into that group. Homer Haley's book, for example, on commentary on the book of Revelation falls into that view. Roberts in the commentaries, the redback commentaries, sweet commentaries. J. W. Roberts has that view. There are many books in the denominational world that hold that view. And so that's not a view just exclusive to churches of Christ or whatever. It's held by widely among people of various segments of Christianity. Be sure you turn off all your cell phones. Can you get it to turn on? Okay. Now, view number two, the fall of Jerusalem. Now let's see. Who read Foy Wallace? So you're familiar with that view.
Yes, sir.
Fall of Jerusalem view. So he says that the book of Revelation is primarily about the fall of Jerusalem. Now, doesn't Jesus prophesy about the fall of Jerusalem? Yes. Isn't that a very important event? Yes. Isn't that going to be a significant event in the history of the church? Yes. Aren't there various plagues and destructive forces that are let loose on the enemies of Christ described in this book? Yes. And so he says that he believes the book was written in the 60s A.D. Not like 80 or 90, but 60s A.D., earlier than any of these other views. And that it was written in 62 or 3 or something like that, and foretells the fall of Jerusalem. Now, as we go through, we'll see different applications he makes of that as to the harlot and the beast and so on. We'll take a look at that. But he puts it in that setting and says that that is a significant event, and that the plagues and all the things that are poured out are describing the fall of Jerusalem, a significant event in the history of the church, and one that Jesus dealt with in Matthew 24. And so that's the view that Wallace takes, and says that it's mainly about the coming fall of Jerusalem. So that's a view held by some, not real widely held these days, but and I think not as many hold that as maybe once did. But it is a view that we will come across. The third is the view about religious and political history of the world. That is, that like the book of Daniel, how many different kingdoms does the book of Daniel prophesy about? I think you were saying, yeah, 5. 5 is right. Most people would say 4, but 5 is the right answer, because he prophesies about Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonian Empire, and he prophesies about the Medes and Persians, prophesies about the Greeks and the Romans, and the kingdom of God. See, there's number 5, is the kingdom of God. So, like Daniel prophesies about succeeding historical events, the book of Revelation is like that, and it prophesies about a series of historical events, and it's going to tell about the religious and political history of the world, from starting out with the Roman Empire. And you'll read, according to this view, you'll read about several different Roman emperors and things that are happening to the Roman Empire, and the fall of the Roman Empire, and the coming of the Muslims, and about Muhammad, and you'll read about oppression of the church in various ways. You'll read about the Reformation movement. This view will make of the two witnesses, John Calvin and Martin Luther. So you're going to have the Reformation movement. Talk about war between France and England on the high seas. So like the book of Daniel, foretells 600 years, 700 years of history of the world and succeeding empires. This book is of that style and will tell about the history of the world, both the religious and political history, not just the political history, but the religious history as well. The rise and fall of the church and the Reformation movement and all of these things. So this view says it's going to take the different things about the coming history of the world and foretell those between the first coming and the second coming of Christ. And so the two end pieces of this religious and political history would be the coming of Christ the first time and the coming of Christ the second time. The religious and political history of the world. And so that is going to be the view that this takes from the first to the second coming of Christ. And it's going to be a well-known, it's going to deal with these major issues in world, political, and religious history. Now, book by Hines. Who read Hines? You read Hines? Hines takes this view. This is Hines' view. And it was a view in Churches of Christ that was taken by a good many people when I grew up. As I was growing up, I heard this is the kind of preaching I heard about Revelation was of this sort. One of the interesting things about this view is that the Roman Catholic Church plays a very important role. Did you read about the Roman Catholic Church in this book by Hines? So he says that the second beast is the Roman Catholic Church. And it plays see, I said religious and political history. So it's got the Catholic Church in it and the rise of the Catholic Church. And so that is part of the view of the Catholic Church, and the departure from the original church and all these things will be part of that view between the first and second coming to Christ. So you've got the Catholic Church, and you've got the Reformation movement. All this is foretold in this book according to those who hold this view. So that's the third major view of people who talk and write about the book of Revelation. And then here is view number 4, which we've called repeating principles. That is, that the book is about the political and religious persecution of the church, but not particular people and events. That is, this view says that there's a kind of a template, that wherever Christ is preached, religious and political persecution is going to follow. And this view says that it's not that the book is about a particular time and place of that persecution, but that in any century, in any location, wherever Christ is preached, these things are going to follow. And so it is about a set of events or repeating principles or kind of a template that is going to be true in many times and places. Well, isn't it true that when Christ comes, opposition arises? Oh, yeah, that's probably true. And so this view says that it's not about a particular time and place, or Roman Empire, or John Calvin and Martin Luther, or things like that, but it's about just this standard way of operating, this template that's going to happen, this paradigm that's going to happen. And you can put it on any time and place, any century, any location, set of circumstances is going to follow. Now, who's an author that takes this view?
Henderson.
Hendrickson. See, here we go, Hendrickson. This is Hendrickson's view. Now, in Hendrickson, in addition to that, Hendrickson also says that Revelation, that in the 22 chapters of Revelation, there are how many cycles? 7 cycles. That covers from the first to the second coming 7 times in the book of Revelation. Chapters 1 to 3, first beginning to the end of Christ's coming. Then chapters 4 through 6 covers that same period of time, and chapters 7 through 9 cover that same period of time, so that it goes over and over these, and gradually as it goes through, it gives more and more emphasis to the final events, but that it covers this set of this time period. First coming, second coming is covered 7 times in the book of Revelation. Well, if it's covered, it has to be covered 7 times, wouldn't it? I mean, we're talking about Revelation. Isn't 7 a big number in Revelation? So 7 times you cover first coming and second coming. The first one being more emphasis on the front end, and the last one being more emphasis on the back end, and so on. So that's Hendrickson. And Burton Kaufman's book. I don't know, any of you are familiar with Burton Kaufman's series of commentaries? Burton Kaufman takes this view, and some others, but Hendrickson is probably the best known of the writers that hold this view. Would be Hendrickson. Okay, now that's number 4. Number 4. And here comes view number 5. Prediction of events around Christ's second coming. This is one we hear so much about in the public realm these days. This would be Left Behind and Premillennial View and so on. This would be the one. And so this is very dominant, very pronounced, very widespread these days. This view, and of course it is a view sometimes called the futurist view. Futurist in the sense that they believe that we're now living in chapter 3. First 2 chapters and part of chapter 3 has happened, and all the rest of it is yet to come. So this is called the futurist view. Futurist view. And what future events do they think will be taking place? Well, not necessarily all of it from the book of Revelation, but some of it, and some of it from Matthew 24 and other passages, 1 Thessalonians 4 and 1 Corinthians 15 and other places. They hold the view that when Christ came the first time, we're going to spend our last day talking about this a lot, so I'm just giving you a quick glimpse of it today. That when Christ came the first time, he was rejected by the Jews and did not get to set up the kingdom he meant to set up. And therefore, he set up the church as kind of a temporary thing that he did. That was not part of the original plan, but he set up the church as kind of a holding pattern until he could come back the second time and establish his kingdom. So he came the first time to set up a kingdom, failed to do that, and then he gave us signs by which we can tell when the end of the world is approaching. We know from wars and rumors of wars and earthquakes and famines. Hasn't there been a lot of that lately? Wow. So from all those we'll know that the end is coming upon us soon. And then this view holds that there will be a rapture, a moment in time when all the living Christians are transformed into the new bodies and taken up, and all the dead Christians are raised, and they go up to be with the Lord in heaven for 7 years. Meanwhile, there's tribulation on earth. The first 3.5 years of that period is spent in rebuilding the temple in Jerusalem. The last 3.5 of that period, that tribulation period, will be war over Israel, climaxing in a terrible conflagration called the Battle of Armageddon. And in the midst of that terrible battle over Israel, Christ will return, put down the conflict, and set up the kingdom that he meant to establish when he came the first time. and then reign on Christ for reign on earth for 1,000 years, and that those who were raptured with him will come back and take part in this reign, that the Old Testament good will be raised at that point to take part in the reign, and those who are judged to be worthy through the tribulation period, who become Christians during the tribulation period, will enter that reign in their mortal bodies. And they'll all reign with him for 1,000 years, and then will come the end of time when the final judgment will arrive, and the wicked and the righteous be separated, and then eternity with heaven and hell. So that view, which some of you read books about, that would be Walvoord's view, of course. So this view is common with lots of writers these days. The Left Behind series is based on that premise of those events, and is a fictionalized account of people living through all. It's hard to believe they made 11 books. I've forgotten how many. Finally got 11 books they got, telling the story over and over and over and over. It's incredible what they could do with it. So anyway, so that the Left Behind series would take that. Hal Lindsey, you said you read Hal Lindsey. Hal Lindsey, of course, is of this view, and Billy Graham and lots of others would hold this premillennial view. What does the word premillennial suggest?
Before the 1,000
Before
years.
1,000 years. So, what is before 1,000 years? 1,000 years is before pre-millennial. 1,000. What happens pre-millennial?
The church.
Well, yeah, it does. And they're really talking about Christ's second coming. Is just before the 1,000 years. See, his second coming will be pre-millennium. Millennium, the 1,000-year reign, and what happens just before the 1,000-year reign, Christ comes back. So his return is pre-millennium. Okay, now this is a kind of a quick thumbnail sketch of these views and of some of the authors that hold these views. We'll be going over that territory a lot as we go along, but I think it's helpful here at the beginning to get kind of a picture of these views in our minds, and then we'll work through that as we go along. And on Friday, we'll spend our time on Friday actually exploring this whole thing in some detail and how to respond to that, the scripture and things like that. So we'll do a lot of that on Friday, but we'll be mentioning it as we go along through the book of Revelation. Okay, now, those are the 5 most common views, the views that would be held by the majority of those who write and speak about Revelation fall into one of those 5 categories. So, as you're talking with people or reading books or whatever it is about the book of Revelation, it's helpful to kind of see, I see he fits in this group, and so he's kind of coming from this point of view. Or you're visiting with somebody and they start to ask you about it, and you can say, well, okay, I see what direction they're coming from, so I know sort of how to engage them in discussion about it. Now, these then are the 5 views. Now, I'd like to suggest to you now some principles, keys, that unlock the book of Revelation. These are keys that I believe can help us to decide which of these 5 views has the most merit. So we're going to look at these keys, and of course, if you have keys, how many must you have?
7.
Got to have 7. Okay. Same reason Hendrickson had 7 cycles in his book. I've got 7 in mine. Okay.
If he can do it,
Yeah. Why not? Why not? So 7 cycles. Now, as we go through these, I want to ask you some questions and let you kind of help us develop through this. The first one is that the book of Revelation is written in symbols. What kind of literature do we call Revelation? Apocalyptic. Apocalyptic. What does apocalyptic literature mean? what are the characteristics of apocalyptic literature?
Figurative.
They use a lot of figures of speech.
Very pictorial.
Pictorial, yeah, that's a good word, pictorial, in the sense that it uses animals and all kind of things as ways of telling the story. Predictive. It tells about the future. So it is figurative, and it's predictive. It is. We might use the word. It's a coded book. That is, it's written in code. The figures are a code. Now, so that it's kind of it's seen on this level, and the meaning is down on this level. Kind of a book written in code. Now, I want all of you to do, put your hands like this. Put your hands like this and repeat it. Come on, now, hands like this. Now repeat after me. This is what it says. I believe you can beat that. This is what it says. You're still not with me, friends. Let's do it one more time. This is what it says. This is what it means. See, that's how figures of speech work. Jesus said, I am the water of life. Is Jesus really water? Well, he said he was, didn't he? Are you telling me he's not water? You don't believe what he said? Huh? Jesus said, I'm the bread of life. How can something be water and bread at the same time? How can he do that? Is that another miracle he performed? Well, no, we understand about that, that he says, I am the water of life, as a way of showing us a deeper meaning. See, what is the deeper meaning of the water of life? He quenches our thirst. Our what kind of thirst? Our spiritual thirst, see. And can you live without water? Physically? Can you live spiritually without Jesus? No. So there's a lot of good meanings there that he suggests when he says, I am the water of life, and we see beneath that what he means. What is a parable?
An earthly story with a heavenly...
Exactly. And it is a kind of figure of speech, isn't it? A story told here with a meaning down here, okay? A sower went forth to sow. And some of the seed fell on good ground, and some of it fell on thorny ground, and some of it fell on hard ground. But the meaning's down here, isn't it, you see? And the disciples came to Jesus and said, we didn't get it. We got this, but we didn't get this. See, we got the story up here, but we didn't get the story down there. Tell us what it means. Well, the seed is the Word of God. And the soil represents the hearts of people. You know, okay? So here is the story told on one level and the deeper meaning down on another level. We have that a lot in literature. There's a lot of literature written like that. Some would suggest maybe that Pilgrim's Progress is that kind of story written here with a hidden. Did any of you remember the Poseidon Adventure movie? Only those with gray hair. I'm sorry. Only those with gray hair in here remember the Poseidon Adventure. That narrows it down a little bit. Okay. The Poseidon Adventure is a story told of a ship that sinks, that turns over. It's a cruise ship, and all these people are out having a wonderful time, and there's been an earthquake, and it sends a big wave, a tsunami, and it comes and capsizes the boat. It's still afloat, but it's capsized, so everything is turned upside down. Now it was Christmas time. And in the big ballroom, there was a Christmas tree. And to get to safety, that is to get up where it is safe, you have to crawl from the top of the Christmas tree up to the bottom of the Christmas tree. But safety comes by climbing up the Christmas tree. you begin to say, what's going on here? And then there are groups going around looking for the way out. This group is going that way, and this group going this way, and this group going this way, and they all say, oh, come my way, come, we'll find the way out. And only one group finds the way out. They wander around through and have all kinds of struggles, and finally, the way for them to get out, in order to get out, they have to go under the water. The way out is under the water. That ring any bells? They have to go under the water and come up on the other side in order to be saved. That's kind of interesting. And then they're still not out yet. There's a way to open up a space in the boat up there, but somebody has to turn a big valve like this in order to open up this space so they can get out. And whoever does it is going to have to die, because he can't do that and then turn around and get out. He's going to have to say, and so one of them says, I'll do it. And so he climbs up there, and he jumps out here, and he grabs this big wheel, and he turns it like this, and this space opens where they're going to be able to crawl out to safety, and he falls, just like this. Well, that's just, I guess is 99% of the people that see that story never see any hidden meaning, you see. Did you ever see a hidden meaning in it?
I didn't. I saw the movie. I never saw any of it.
Well, but you begin to look and, what? That's got a religious message, you know. So it's a story told on this level with something else down here. See, that's apocalyptic literature. What are some other cases of apocalyptic literature in the Bible?
Daniel.
That book of Daniel, where Daniel has, in what form does he tell the story? What kind of images does he use? Animals, okay. Chapter 7, he uses animals. He has a lion and a bear and a leopard and a ferocious beast with 10 horns, okay. Is he really talking about animals? This is animals, but the real meaning is down below, you see. That's apocalyptic literature. Ezekiel has some, a wheel and a wheel and all this stuff. And so there are various places in the Bible that make use of not only figurative language, but apocalyptic language. How do you answer when somebody asks you if you believe the Bible is literal or figurative? What do you say?
Yes.
Huh?
Yes.
Yes, of course. You mean you don't believe the Bible means what it says?
I sure do.
Well, figures of speech are very common in our language. Very common. If I were to say to you right now, I'm burning up, would you call the fire department? That would really be a figure of speech to say, I'm a little warm. If I said I'm freezing to death, would you call the undertaker? No, you say he means by that he's a little on the cool side. Sports announcers use figurative language. Boy, he's quick as lightning on that one. Really? As quick as lightning? Was he really? Well, how quick is lightning? Well, it's pretty fast. Well, our language is filled with figures. And we know how to interpret those. It's sort of like we're wearing hats. And we wear our literal hat until somebody says something and we say, well, that really doesn't fit if you take it literally. He's not really burning up, and so he must mean something else. And so we take off our literal hat, put on a figurative hat, and say, oh, I get it. Jesus tells a parable, and we say, oh, I got to take off my literal hat and put on my figurative hat, because I know he doesn't mean He's not just talking about agriculture when he talks about a sower goes out to sow. And so I have to switch hats and put on my figurative hat and understand it. If Jesus says, if your right hand offends you, cut it off and pluck out your eye. I said, well, that seems a little harsh. Maybe I ought to take off my literal hat and put on my figurative hat and say, oh, he just means that you've got to go to great lengths to avoid temptation. See? So we know how to do this, and we do this in our ordinary speech.
But there were people who literally did that.
That's right. There are people who fail to do that. Exactly. And they get into trouble. They get into trouble both in politics and in religion. Sometimes politicians say something figurative and it's taken literally, and they have a hard time answering for that. So we have to watch for that in our everyday language, but it's in the Bible as well. And when we come to the book of Revelation, we have a book that is highly symbolic. It is so symbolic that we almost don't need our literal hat at all after we pass chapter 3. It's virtually all written after chapter 3. It's virtually all written in this apocalyptic way. Now it starts out with John, a real person on Patmos, a real island, writing to 7 churches that are real churches in real cities. There's some figurative stuff sprinkled along there, but once we pass that, we're dealing with things pretty much on a figurative basis. Now, here is an interesting question. Why did Jesus feel compelled to reveal the message he wanted John to have in this kind of coded language? Why is it like that?
Obviously, he's trying to hide the message from someone.
What did Jesus say about, remember Jesus' disciples asked him, why do you speak in parables? What was his answer? So those on the inside will get it, and those on the outside won't. Same reason, isn't it? So those on the inside will get the message. If you know your Old Testament really well, you'll get this message. If you understand how to take this, you'll get the message. But those on the outside come to read this book, and they won't have a clue. And they'll think it's a bedtime story about animals, okay? So that they won't get it. So the point here is, if we are seeking to know the meaning of the book, and the book is written in this kind of code, we need to come up with a meaning that had to be hidden in that way. There was some reason that the meaning is something that required the coding of it. So that gives us a clue as we try to seek which of these views to follow. Which of these views would have required some kind of coded writing. So it wouldn't have been obvious to an outsider what it meant. We'll come to more of that later. Okay, so the book of Revelation is written in symbols. And so when we read about dragons and beasts and lambs with 7 horns and 7 eyes, and we read about volcanoes erupting into the sea and turning into blood and all kinds of things like that, we will understand that this is a special kind of literature. Think of apocalyptic literature sort of like you think of novel or short story or epic or some other kind of literature. Apocalyptic literature is one special kind of literature, and it has certain characteristics, and it requires a certain kind of approach to understand it. So we're dealing with an apocalypse. And there are other portions of the Bible written in that way, and there are non-biblical things written in that way. All it's written in symbols. That's the first key to understanding the book. All right? Now let's come to key number 2. The book of Revelation is written about things which will shortly come to pass. Shortly come to pass. Shortly come to pass. The time frame for the book of Revelation is a very important element in our understanding it. What is its time frame? We need to understand that. What is its time frame? Well, my contention is that the book of Revelation will give you much about its time frame if we will listen to it. Okay? If we'll listen, it'll tell us what its time frame is. And so, we're going to look at some verses. Chapter 1, verse 1. Well, that's a pretty good place to look if you want to know something about a book, is in the very first verse of the first chapter. The revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show unto his servants, even the things which must, say it with me, shortly come to pass. Okay? Shortly come to pass. Shortly come to pass, starting when? When he wrote it, right? Not starting 2,000 years later. So this verse says that the book of Revelation is going to be about something that's going to take place relatively soon after its writing. And that's important for us to see. Relatively soon after its writing, it is going to come to pass. Well, here's some other verses. Chapter 1, verse 3. The time is at hand. Time is at hand. What does that mean? Well, I'll have to tell you my old joke, I guess. As the dog said when the train ran over his tail, it won't be long now. That's what this means. The time's at hand. It won't be long now. Okay? It won't be long now. Chapter 3, verse 11, Jesus says, I come quickly. Now, what does it mean, I come quickly? Did he keep his word? Is he talking about his second coming? What do you think? If you're talking about his second coming, he didn't do it, did he? I mean, by what stretch of imagination would you say 2,000 years is quickly? So what does it mean, I come quickly?
In judgment.
I come quickly to do what I said, to bring the judgment I said in this book I will bring. I'm going to come quickly and carry out the words of this book. It's going to happen soon. That corresponds with verse 1, chapter 1, verse 1, chapter 1, verse 3. It's going to happen soon. There are various times in the Bible when deity says, I'm coming to do something. That is not referring to a second coming. God said, I'm going to come and do something to Egypt. Well, he didn't mean that he was literally going to come, or didn't mean that Jesus was going to come to earth and do it, or whatever. Various things that mention that deity comes to do something. You might say George Bush went to Iraq and whipped Saddam Hussein. But did George Bush literally go to Iraq and do it? He sent his messengers to carry it out. Okay? He sent his troops to carry it out. But there's a sense in which he went over there and did it. And so Jesus says, I come quickly. It doesn't mean I'm coming into my literal second coming quickly. It means I'm coming to do what I've said in this book I will do. And when are you going to do that, Lord? I'm going to do it quickly. So look for this book to be carried out quickly, soon. The time is at hand. Well, we go on to some more verses like this. Chapter 22, verse 6. The things which must shortly come to pass. Chapter 22, verse 7. I come quickly. Chapter 22, verse 10. Seal not up the words of the prophecy of this book, for the time is at hand. In what form was a book written in those days? They looked like scrolls. So here's a scroll. And what did you do to keep the scroll in place? Put a seal on it, okay? Now, Jesus says, don't seal this one up. Leave it open. Why, does he say? Why leave it open? time's at hand. Back in Daniel, when he came to a certain point in Daniel, he said, seal it up, because it's going to be a long time. Don't seal this one up, it's going to happen soon. And what are we talking about here? We're trying to establish the timetable the book of Revelation gives for itself. That's what we're working on, okay? Everybody got that? That's what we're working on. What is the timetable the book gives for itself? So we have these various passages that suggest to us something about when the book is going to happen, according to the book itself. Now, what does shortly mean? What does quickly mean? What does soon mean? Well, we'll have to understand a little more about the story of the book. It doesn't happen in a day or a year, but it begins soon and plays out over a fairly quick period of time in terms of the broad scope of history. Okay, now here comes number 3. It's given to comfort persecuted Christians. The book of Revelation is given to comfort persecuted Christians. I think we could say that the theme of the book of Revelation is persecution of Christians. This is a very fundamental theme of the book. Some commentator expressed it by saying, the blood of Christians is on every page of the book of Revelation. What would that mean? Every opening. You can't read through a whole page without finding something about the persecution of God's people. It permeates the book. Well, let's look at some passages on that. Chapter 1, verse 9, John says, I am a partaker with you in the tribulation. I is John, who is you?
7 churches.
7 churches, the ones to whom he's writing. I am in the persecution, I'm in the tribulation, and so are you. Now, the premillennial view says the tribulation hadn't come yet, you see. But John was in it. How can John be in it if it hadn't come yet? So, I, John, am partaker with you, Ephesus, Smyrna, Thyatira, Pergamos, Sardis, Laodicea, Philadelphia. I'm a partaker with you in the tribulation. We are under attack. We're under attack. 5 of the 7 letters in chapters 2 and 3, 5 of the 7 letters to the 7 churches mention persecution. 5 of the 7 letters to the churches mention persecution. And so that is a key idea about the meaning of those letters and the meaning of the book. Chapter 6, verse 9. If I had to pick one verse, or one passage of 3 verses, which I believe is the most helpful in understanding the theme of the book of Revelation, this would be it. Revelation chapter 6, verses 9, 10, and 11. We'll come back over this and set it in context when we go through the book, but this book, this is at the opening of the 5th seal, and it says, the souls of those, I saw the souls of those beheaded for their testimony, later called the testimony of Jesus. Beheaded for their testimony. They have a question for God, and what's their question?
How long?
How long, O Master, holy and true, do you not judge and avenge our blood on them that are on the earth? Now, what have we learned so far? What has already happened? Persecution. I mean, they've been beheaded. Obviously, they've been killed for the cause of Christ, so we've got martyrs already. We might call these the early martyrs, and they're going to be later martyrs. The early martyrs call out a question, how long? O Master, holy and true, before you right the scales of justice, something is out of balance, something is haywire, something is messed up. We got killed, and the ones who did it seems to be getting by with it. You ever feel that way? you and people you know are being faithful, and the good things seem to happen to the bad people, and bad things happen to the good people. You'll feel that way sometimes. It's kind of how they feel. They want to know, how long, O Master, holy and true, do you not judge and avenge our blood on them that are on the earth? And God's answer is a really strange one. You would think he would say, well, you're right, it's time to take care of this. But what does he say? Take a white robe and wait for a while. Because more of your brethren, he says, are going to be persecuted like you have been. There's been persecution. There's going to be more persecution before God takes care of the problem. Now, from our standpoint, it looks like, well, God, why didn't you go ahead and do that and not have so many of your people go through that terrible persecution time? But looking at it from our historical advantage, what do we know? Was the church bigger or smaller when the persecution time was over? Well, it was bigger. It was widespread. It had permeated the Roman Empire. They had become famous. There's a book that I recommend to you called The Rise of Christianity. The Rise of Christianity, which is written by a guy, whose name I'll think of in a minute, who is a sociologist. And he became curious about, his name is Rodney Stark. Rodney Stark. And he became curious about how the early church got so big so fast. How did the early church get so big so fast? And so first he studied, how big did it get? And from the sources he studied and the things he could pull together and his sociological viewpoint of things, he believes that by 350 A.D., there were 34 million Christians. 34 million Christians by halfway through the 4th century, 350 A.D., 34 million Christians. And he says the two reasons they got so big, something kind of capsuling what he says. The reason they got so large, the church got so large, is first of all because of the way they lived. They helped people. When the plagues came, they nursed them back to health. They didn't run away. They stayed and helped each other and helped their neighbors. They were honest. They were good workers. Their lives were a recommendation of their religion. If you can't preach that, you can't preach. Their lives were an attraction to people. Okay? So the first reason the church grew is because of the way they lived, and the second reason is the way they died. I mean, here are Christians being led out into an arena to certain death, being eaten by wild animals, ferocious lions, and they go out to face that singing hymns to Jesus. And the people sitting up in the audience say, what kind of religion is this that lets people face death with that kind of hope and calm and assurance? We want to know more about that religion. So the way they lived and the way they died became an attraction. So God says, I'll let it go on while it's working. That was hard on these early Christians, taken away from their families. Terrible torture. Awful kinds of ways to die. And in the big scheme of things, as God can see things, it's going to establish the church where it'll never be forgotten. How long, O Master, holy and true, do you not judge and avenge our blood on them that are on the earth? Take a white robe and wait a while, until more of your brethren have gone through what you have. Now, the book of Revelation is written to answer this question. How long, O Master, hold in truth? You not judge and avenge our blood on them that are on the earth. And so the answer is, God will judge and avenge their blood, but it's going to be on His own timetable. So I'm using this passage to suggest to you that a key theme in the book of Revelation is persecution. Persecution of Christians. And what God is going to do about it. And this question sets that up. This question sets that up. Well, we're studying about the question of persecution of Christians being one of the key themes of the book. And so here's another one, chapter 7, verse 14. Those in heaven who came out of the great tribulation. It speaks of those in heaven already who came out of the great tribulation, which those holding the premillennial view says hasn't happened yet. But here, these are already in heaven, who came out of the great persecution. Chapter 11, verse 7 speaks of the death of the two witnesses. We'll come to those two witnesses later on and see how different views treat those, but I believe they represent the early church and those who testified of Jesus under duress. Number 12, verse 17 speaks of Satan's desire to make war on those who testify of Jesus. War against the church. That's persecution. War against the church. Here's chapter 13, verse 7, speaking of the first beast that came up. And it says it was given to him to make war with the saints for 42 months. Make war with the saints for 42 months. Okay. That means there's going to be persecution of Christians. And what else would war against the saints mean if it doesn't mean persecution of Christians? We're just talking about the theme now. These many, many passages talk about persecution. Chapter 13, verse 15, the second beast will kill those who refuse to worship the first beast. Those who refuse to worship the first beast are going to be Christians, and so here's another beast that's going to act against the church, killing those that won't do what he wants them to do. Chapters 17:6 and 19:2 speak of the harlot. Speak of the harlot. And said that the harlot spills the blood of the saints. Well, what would spilling the blood of the saints mean? Persecuting Christians, isn't it? Or 18:24 speaks of Babylon as a great city that has persecuted Christians to the point that the blood of Christians is running in the streets. Running in the streets. Or chapter 20, verse 4 speaks of those beheaded for the testimony of Jesus. But you can't be beheaded and not die, I guess. So this obviously is speaking of those who have given their lives for Christ. Beheaded for the testimony of Jesus. So we've had then so far these keys. It's written in symbols. It's written about things that will surely come to pass. We need to understand the timetable Revelation gives for itself. And its theme is a message to comfort persecuted Christians. Now, why do I say to comfort persecuted Christians? If a theme in the book of Revelation is persecution, if it comes up on every page, why does Jesus keep bringing it up? Well, he must have some message of comfort and help to those who are experiencing these things, or why would he bring it up? When you go to the hospital to see somebody in the hospital who's got pneumonia, you don't say, my brother died of that. You go to give a message of comfort. You see? Why would Jesus bring up persecution, 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 and have no message of comfort? I don't believe he'd do that. So the meaning of Revelation must be some kind of message of comfort to bless those who are experiencing the persecution that's mentioned so often in the book. Well, we come to number 4. Now, here is key number 4. That is, the book of Revelation begins to identify some of the symbols that it uses. We said it's a symbolic book. The main characters of the book are in code, many of them in animals. And so let's see if the book of Revelation gives us enough clues by which we can unscramble the code and see who is represented by the animal. Okay? Now, let's talk about the dragon. The dragon is first mentioned in chapter 12, verse 3. Which speaks of this great red dragon standing by to devour the child about to be born of the woman standing on the moon with the sun wrapped around her shoulders. He has 7 heads and 10 horns. He is great and red, and he drags a third of the stars out of the sky with his tail. That's pretty big, isn't it? I mean, this is a picture of a gigantic dragon, all right? And he attempts to devour the child as soon as the child is born. These are things that describe the dragon now. We'll see if we can focus in on who is represented by the dragon. And here's his picture as an artist has pictured it. What do you see in that picture? Do you see his 7 heads? Can you count 7 heads? Can you count 10 horns? See, there's more. Some of the heads have more than 1 horn. See his tail sweeping a third of the stars out of the sky? That's pretty good. That's a pretty good idea. That's pretty good. So, 7-headed dragon, red, 10 horns, huge tail, sweeps a third of the stars out of the sky with his tail. And so the question then is, what does he do? Well, he's going to empower 2 beasts. He's going to bring up 2 beasts to be his helpers. He's going to be bound in the abyss for 1,000 years. And eventually he's going to be cast into the lake of fire. Now watch carefully. That's what it says. What does it mean? I'm probably going to do this 1,000 times this week. That's what it says. What does it mean? Okay. Now, in this case, the book of Revelation tells us specifically who is the dragon. So, I want to give you 2 passages. Chapter 12, verse 9, chapter 20, verse 2, which you can look up and read in your Bible, and it will tell you, it doesn't leave to any doubt as to what entity is represented by the dragon. The dragon is, tell me, Satan, the devil. That's what it says in those 2 verses in plain, ordinary Greek, I guess I should say. So here it says. So here's a way in which the book starts to give us clues. Okay, here's what it says, a dragon, but the real meaning is something else. The real meaning is the devil. So every time you see dragon, you can write devil, Satan, out in the margin. That's how this book is going to work. So the dragon is Satan, the devil, the deceiver. Now, he is a main character in this book because he is the one who is devising the plan against the church. Who is it that wants to get the church destroyed? Well, it's Satan. This book reveals his play plan, his game plan. So Christians will understand what's going on. So the devil is a key player in this storyline of the book of Revelation. All right, let's go now to the first beast. He comes up in chapter 13, 1 to 10, and is also, he's mentioned in other places, but in chapter 17, 8 to 14, more of his characteristics are given. So in those two patches, we get enough clues to determine who is represented by the first beast. Who's represented by the first beast? Okay. What do we learn about it? When it comes up from the sea, red, he has 7 heads and 10 horns. Remember, 10 horns. 7 heads and 10 horns. His body is like a leopard. His paws are like a bear, and his mouth is like a lion. Now, if you know your Bible, what do you think of? Book of Daniel, chapter 7, where Daniel says there were 4 beasts that came up out of the sea. Remember that? And the first beast that came up was a lion. Second beast that came up was a bear. Third beast was a leopard. The fourth beast is not named as any animal, but he has 10 horns. Okay? So these 4 characteristics correspond to those animals back in Daniel. Well, we've got to ask, back in Daniel, says those 4 animals, what did it mean? The lion represented Babylonians, Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians. The bear represented Medes and Persians. The leopard represented the Greeks, Alexander the Great. And the animal with 10, the ferocious animal with 10 horns represented the Roman Empire. Now we have here an animal made up of all of these. It's kind of interesting, made up of all of these. But if you think of those successive kingdoms, the Babylonians, Medes and Persians, the Greeks, and the Romans, they were succeeding empires who encompassed the land of the preceding empire plus a little more. So the Romans ruled over, well, not all, but most of what the previous empires had, and added a lot more to it. So to say that the fourth animal was made up of pieces of the earlier animals would suggest that it covers some of the same territory as the other kingdoms had covered, okay? So, he is saying, I think John is saying to us, Christ is saying to us, as this is revealed, that that those succeeding empires were all rolled into the last one that had 10 horns. And if you know your Old Testament, you'll know who is being described as this beast. You'll have a strong clue on that. So at this point, I think I would say the presumption is, based on that this fourth one is going to represent this beast is going to represent the Roman Empire. But let's wait and see if the other clues show that, or if it shows something else. So let's look at other clues and see what it says. Here's a picture someone has written of that beast. What do you see? Do you see paws like a bear? Yeah, you see body like a leopard? See mouth like a lion? 7 heads, 10 horns, ferocious. That's pretty good. I didn't draw that, by the way. I don't possess that talent, but that's pretty good. That's pretty good. Okay, now, other clues, other characteristics of this beast. Like Daniel's fourth beast, fourth kingdom, in chapter 13, verses 5 to 7, we have these characteristics. He makes war on the saints. This beast makes war on the saints for 42 months. So how's this beast going to treat the church? He's going to make war, persecute the saints. This beast, which, based on what Daniel, the comparisons to Daniel, I think must be some kind of a political empire, is going to persecute the church. He has universal authority. He rules over tribes and tongues and people and nations. Over how much territory does this beast rule? Everything. Tribes and tongues and people and nations. A big, big empire. And the third characteristic here is everybody worships the beast. As those who are within the sphere of influence of this beast, tribes, tongues, people, and nations, is being required to treat the leaders of this beast as God. The leader of this beast is God. So that comes out of chapter 13, verses 5 to 7. Just picking up more characteristics now by which we want to identify this beast. Okay, now here's some more. Revelation 17, verses 9 and 10. We're told the 7 heads represent 7 kings. This beast has 7 heads. And each head represents a king. So this is an empire that has rulers, kings or emperors. And an interesting characteristic is that 5 of these are past. 5 of these heads have already ruled. 1 is reigning now, and another is yet to come for a little while. And then there will be an 8th, which is like one of the 5, one of the 7. One of the 7. Now, there's some important things we learn from this. What does this tell you about that beast? That 5 are past, 1 is, and 1's yet to come. What does this tell you about this beast?
It's still a reigning power.
He's reigning power when
The day of the writing.
John is writing this book. He is reigning then. 1 is. Well, that's pretty important, isn't it? This is an empire that existed when John is writing the book. 5 kings are already past. 1 is, 1's yet to come. Then there could be an 8th, which is one of the 7, which is still more to come. We'll go into more detail about that when we get to that part, so I don't want to get off on that right now. But this suggests to us that the book is written during the time of the existence of this beast. 1 of the heads, 1 of the kings, is now reigning, he says. Then, the 7 heads, he says, not only represent 7 kings, but represent 7 hills. And remember, you're sitting in a meeting of the church in Ephesus about in the 80s or 90s AD, and somebody's reading this book and to you, and they mention 7 hills. What do you think of? Rome was a city built on 7 hills. It was famous for that. I mean, that was common knowledge. Built on 7 Capitoline hills, and so on. I can't name them all. It's built on 7 hills. So that would have been a ready identification to those who first heard this book. Now, here's summarizing. It's a universal political power that existed at the time the book is written, persecutes early Christians. The heads are worshipped by everybody. The emperors are worshipped by everybody. Now, what do you think those early Christians, when they heard these words, what would they have thought of? I just don't think there's any doubt, but there are plenty of clues. If you know the Old Testament, if you know current events about the 7 hills and the kings, I just don't believe early Christians could have missed it. But this represents the Roman Empire. And so, and it goes back to Daniel's 4th beast. Daniel's 4th beast. So when you put all these things together, it seems very clear that those who first received the book. Let me say a word about that right now. One of the key principles of hermeneutics is what? You have to look at the book like those who first read it. if it didn't mean that to them, it really not supposed to mean that to us today. We have to put ourselves, somebody wrote a book, I love the book I didn't care too much for, as I didn't agree with all its interpretation, but it had a wonderful title. It was Looking at the Book of Revelation Through First Century Glasses. Oh, I like that title, that's really good. That's what we've got to do. We've got to look through first century glasses and ask ourselves, what were the people at Ephesus and Smyrna and Thyatira and Pergamum? What would they have, how would they have identified a beast with these characteristics? I just don't believe there's any question in the world, but that they would have taken all of these things from the Old Testament and from their current situation and have tied it to the book of Revelation, to the Roman Empire, as described here in the book of Revelation. So, each head of the beast is an emperor, and the beast represents the Roman Empire. So, summarizing now, okay? Summarizing. Listen to my words carefully now. The dragon stands for Satan. The beast stands for Roman Empire. I believe that's pretty important. Okay. Now, we're going to come to the second beast. It's about time for our break, and so we'll take a break right now, and for 15 minutes.